Hey everybody, welcome inside the green room with PV3. And I actually got Blair here with me today because when he told me that we had a guest, this guest I know that my team was very excited about hosting in Orlando at our big annual Reach Live event back in May. But unfortunately, because of us having to pivot and cancel it and take it virtually, I didn't get to meet this lady. But I know she worked for this small little company that some of you have used called Google. And I don't know if you guys have heard of that, but it's definitely a search engine that's used quite a bit. I believe she helped facilitate a lot of corporate events. And so, Blair, I'm excited because I'm looking at the bullet points of what you guys went through and what you covered. Help our listeners understand what they're going to be getting today.
Yeah, thanks, Pete. Gianna is just a master. She actually has a book called The Art of Event Planning, and she took us through all the different ways that she and her clients think about how they're structuring the events, and really talking about high-profile clientele. So we're talking about meetings with CEOs, we're talking about executive retreats at high-end resorts and things like that. So I think it'll be really interesting for the audience to think about how these really high-touch meeting planners think about how to make it personal. We talked a lot about these professional events can be, not always all that exciting. And especially with these busy professionals who are on the road from their families a lot, bringing them away from them again to do a meeting, how she really creates an atmosphere and an environment that encourages that, collaboration, makes them feel comfortable and makes them have a great time, that gets them buzzing about this event so that the next event is even bigger and better. She just got some really great tips to share that I think you guys will enjoy.
Well, Blair, I'll tell you what I'm excited about as we dive in today. I know that you got some inside nuggets on how she was able to hire folks like Olympic athletes and celebrity chefs and concerts with John Legend and orchestras. And I'm excited to hear that because we're always wanting to up level our events. Like I just recently saw Tony Robbins do his big virtual event with 23,000 people. And I just saw him having all of these cool things on the stage. And man, to hear that she's got some insight on that, man, it's going to be cool. So, hey guys, it's going to be a great episode. Corporate planning, helping you understand really a lot of great info. So let's dive right into it today. Welcome to Inside the Green Room with PV3. Each week, Pete Vargas III, yes, that's me, lets you inside his virtual green room to hang out and learn from the meeting planners who control the most prestigious stages in the world and from the speakers who use those stages to increase their income and impact. Now, let's dive into the green room.
Hello and welcome to Inside the Green Room with PV3. You are back with BBN, co-host, and I am with Gianna Guadini, who's an amazing event planner who's worked with some of the biggest brands like Google and SoftBank and a lot of other really great events throughout her career. She's a sommelier, an interior designer, and she's going to have a lot of really awesome anecdotes and tips to share with you today. She is also the author of The Art of Event Planning. If you are live with us in the Your Events Matter Facebook group, you can see that right now. And we're just going to dive in and start chatting. So Gianna, thanks so much for joining us today. I want to just get started and ask you, how did you get started in the events business?
Hey, Blair, thanks for having me today. Well, I think like most of us, I didn't go to school for event planning. I was actually on the pre-med path. And I think halfway through OChem, I decided maybe this wasn't for me. But all joking aside, once I graduated from UCSD, which was a very science-focused, not business-focused school, I had to figure out what I was really passionate about and what made sense for a long-term career, not just a job. And I was gifted the book, I think it was called How to Get a Job with Any Major, something to that extent. And it was an excellent read. I think it's still available. I went through a number of exercises and landed on event planning as a wonderful opportunity to combine both my analytical, my creative, and my social skills into a lifelong career. So after that, I set out to meet other people that were doing what I wanted to do and having a lot of conversations. And that led me to my first job in San Francisco at a destination management company.
Wow, awesome. Yeah, I think organic chemistry is the death of many a dream for med school, right? That's what I've always
Oh
heard.
yeah, it was brutal.
So, we're going to talk a little bit more about your experience, but fast forwarding to writing this book, which I know has been out for a year now, The Art of Event
Mhm.
Planning. What inspired you to write this book? Sitting down to that kind of endeavor can be a lot of work. So, what made you decide to commit to that?
Yeah, it was a crazy idea, but definitely glad I did it. I think, I had a son a few years ago. I have a 3-year-old, and I used to do so much mentoring, and I had a lot more spare time before I had a kiddo. And I think what I was realizing was I just needed to find ways to scale my hours, and still reach our community and still find a way to connect and share learnings. And so I wrote my book as the beginning of a platform that I now use to engage with people, to share learnings, to speak with our community like we're doing today, and really share everything that I've learned over the course of my 15-year career, 10 of which I spent running Google's most strategic events. And so the concept of my book was to make it an enjoyable read about how to plan exceptional events. It's not a dry textbook, although the Cal State schools are using it now as part of their curriculum. But
Mm.
as you know, Blair, I weave in a lot of fun, interesting stories about my career and events that I planned at Google and other places to make it a little bit more of an interesting read.
Definitely. I read this book cover to cover, and what I loved about it is that it wasn't a how-to book. It wasn't like a, step-by-step guide, because there's plenty of resources out there and that can be pretty boring. But it was very much a narrative about all these amazing events that you've been a part of, even some personal events that you planned for dinner parties and your wedding. But I loved hearing about some of the big events, of course. You worked with Google and planned some really amazing, huge events. Can you tell us a little bit about one or two of those events that were most exciting or that you're most proud of?
Yes, I would love to. Well, for 3 years, I planned Google's biggest event, which was Google Cloud Next, which is our enterprise event, similar to a Salesforce, Dreamforce, or Oracle Open World, for 30,000 people. But I wouldn't say that's my most exciting event. It was very much an enterprise conference with moments of surprise and delight. I think a couple of my most exciting events were more C-level thought leadership style events. So most recently, running events for the SoftBank Vision Fund, I was tasked with pulling together this very high profile event for 500 founders of our portfolio companies, which include some very popular companies like Uber, DoorDash, um, Slack, and our limited partners from around the world, and our public market investors, as well as a lot of industry influencers that we brought in as well. And what made this event so special was that we bought out a property in Southern California. Um, and everybody, we basically transformed this property into what I like to call a giant living room for the course of 3 days. And so, these very influential people could let their guard down, because it was planned that way. It was planned with lots of casual places for people to stop and meet with each other. A lot of formal programming as well. We did an intimate concert with John Legend on the lawn, which was amazing. A celebrity chef dinner with female chefs from the LA area. We brought in Olympic athletes to lead the runs in the morning with small groups, and Formula One race car drivers. There was all kinds of amazing surprise and delight. Like, we had an orchestra that was playing music that was composed via AI using the coordinates of all of our portfolio companies that was popping up around the property. And we had robots that were showing up, roaming around. So it was, the other thing is, from a logistics perspective, is it was incredibly challenging. With guests that high profile, you have to make sure things are super secure, not just physically. And we brought in extensive security detail, but also from, a cybersecurity perspective. We actually brought in our own internet, so that we wouldn't we wouldn't have the risk of hackers hacking in. So just every little detail had to be thought through, and the narrative for the week had to be thought through. And to make sure that each persona that was there had their ultimate experience, we had to actually map it out so that the CEOs arrived first and they could have their own peer-to-peer experience, because that's what CEOs want to do. They want to talk to other CEOs, right? They don't necessarily want to talk to investors, but investors want to talk to CEOs. So we had to find a way to satisfy each persona and still make everybody happy. So it was a very complex, intricate experience that we choreographed, and ultimately extremely successful, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and that's incredible. I mean, that's what's fun to read about some of these events is, a lot of us know events can range in budget, but when you've got a healthy budget, you can do some really amazing things. But there's a lot you can do even if you don't have a huge budget. But I'm interested in kind of how you marketed this event to them. You want to have surprise and delight, so you can't give away everything that they're going to experience or, see and feel while they're there. So how did you get them interested in the event? What was like kind of the driving marketing around that?
Well, to be perfectly honest, we don't have to do a lot of marketing for this event because it's our portfolio. And so the opportunity to convene 100 CEOs from our portfolio company together, along with our leadership, Masa-san is incredibly famous in the investing world, kind of sells itself. But I think what's really important is the way that you're reaching out to people. So limiting the asks of your CEOs and of your VIP clientele, being very thoughtful about how you're reaching out, what you're communicating, who you're communicating things to. So, the CEOs don't need to know all the logistics. That needs to go to their EAs. The CEOs need to know who else is going to be there and why they should make sure that they clear their schedule and attend. There's other events that you can market differently for C-levels. I think having, like I said, a very compelling invitee list as well as a speaker list is going to be your best marketing for this level of attendees. So when you can secure at least one or two extremely compelling speakers or people that this level of attendee want to have access to, you're going to have a much easier time getting attendees to commit to your event than if you don't have an agenda published. If they don't know what the other attendees are that are coming, why would they want to attend an event that they know nothing about? So, you want to be careful not to put the cart before the horse so much when you're marketing.
Yeah, I mean, I think when we think about events, you think of the talent and the speakers, of course, being like a driving factor for a lot of people to attend. But if you haven't worked with events where it's really high level attendees like CEOs, you might not realize that they really care about who else is in the room. That's what they care about most. Oftentimes the speakers can be a big draw, but like you said, they're looking for those peer-to-peer connections, and they want to make sure that they're going to have the opportunity to connect with those folks who have equally busy schedules, so they don't have that opportunity as often.
Yes, Blair. And the other thing that I forgot to mention that's really important for the type of event that I mentioned is creating these evangelists of your brand. So word of mouth is a powerful thing, and you want to build intrigue and mystique with this kind of event that's not marketed publicly. And so when you create an event that's done so well that people start talking about it at a certain level, that's basically your marketing is, you want others to have access to something that they don't have access to.
Right.
So it's another important piece in this level of event.
Yeah, and I mean, that could be true about, all events in the sense that oftentimes our elite clients will ask, when they're being asked to speak or sponsor an event, how many times has this event been put on? What is the experience? Of course, they want to know about attendees and how many people are actually going to show up, but how important it is to really get off on the right foot when it's a first-time event, and how you have to make sure that you create an experience that is going to cause people to talk about it. Then they're going to want to come back the next year, and then they're going to be able to build on that for new attendees to come in as well. I wanted to talk a little bit too about some of the smaller events that you worked on, but for very high profile guests. And we talked a little bit about this on our pre-call, and executive retreats are something we haven't talked a lot about on this podcast, but they still require a lot of planning. And I loved a lot of the personal touches that you bring into even thinking about something that sounds as mundane as an executive retreat. Talk to us a little bit more about how you go about thinking about those types of events and some of the details that you like to include.
Sure. Yeah, I'm glad we're talking about this because I think these are going to be the first types of events that are coming back. They're smaller, they're strategic, and integral to company planning for the years. So I think the first thing that you want to do with any event, and this applies as well to these executive retreats, is get to the bottom of the goals. And there can be many different types of goals for executive retreats. I've planned retreats where, they want to talk strategy. They have different ideas for the roadmap. And so they want to have strategy planning sessions, breakouts, like lots and lots of strategy. There are other times where, there's a lot of new executives or team members and nobody knows each other from around the globe and they want to do more team building. They're having a hard time communicating with each other. They want to break down barriers and do a lot more networking. There could be a combination of many things. So as you're planning out that experience, you want to make sure that you first understand what the goals are and what a successful outcome looks like. And then you work backwards from that. So, you also need to think about logistics as well as you start with strategy, then you go into logistics, and then you go into details. The problem with so many planners these days is they start with the details. And I attribute that to, we're constantly seeing things on Instagram and Pinterest. And so we want to do, think about those little tiny details first, because that's the fun part. But you need to back up a step and start with the objectives. So then when you're thinking about logistics and what you want to achieve, you need to think about, okay, there's executives, maybe they're coming in from around the world. And so you need to think very carefully about where you're planning the event. It doesn't need to be a location where there's access to major airports. Do there not only need to be access to airports, but enough flights that from a business continuity perspective, you don't have to fly everybody in on the same flight, which could be very challenging if you have all your executives on one flight. You want to think through security, like I mentioned before. You want to think through hotels that can be potentially bought out, because when you're gathering executives to discuss very, very strategic private things, you don't want anyone else on the property, and it can be very difficult to buy out a property. And then once you've got, these nuts and bolts in place, then you can start thinking about the really exciting, surprise and delight moments that are going to make this memorable. You can start thinking through what's going to make it extraordinary. At one executive retreat I planned, we had an executive who liked to skydive, and he actually skydived into the welcome reception. And it was, talk about grabbing everybody's attention to welcome people to the event. It was actually not only surprising and delightful, but it helped break down the barriers, because this was an opportunity for other executives to see a different side of this executive. Nobody knew that he was a skydiver. And so it encouraged them to talk about other passions that they had. And at that same event, we wanted to find a way to seat everybody for dinner that wasn't rote, it wasn't ordinary, and it was a way to organically mix people up. And so we had to get into the persona of these execs. They're tech executives. They like solving problems. They like things that are clever. And so each table, instead of having a table number on it, I put a mathematical number. So like pi or the gold number or infinity or whatever. And then I handed everybody an envelope with a definition that fit that number. And then they had to find the table that had the number that fit the definition and self-sort that way. And they loved it. They thought it was super fun, and it got them talking to each other, trying to figure out which number was associated with, the mathematical definition. It worked really well with that persona. So I think those are some of the keys to success with these kinds of groups, is providing those, really exclusive experiences that they don't have anywhere else to bring them together.
I love that. I love some of the examples you share in your book around the little touches like that. But as I mentioned, you're a sommelier.
Mhm.
You're in Northern California. Wine is obviously a big part. Food and wine are big parts of these events. Share with our audience a little bit about how you go about selecting wines and what you like to think about as you're making those, especially for these high level events. What makes for a good wine pairings, and just take us through kind of your thought process.
Ooh, good question. Well, recently in an event, I brought in celebrity chefs, and these were not, the kind of chefs that you have to spend big budget on. These were female chefs that had been, on Top Chef recently, or they had a new restaurant that was super popular. And I also brought in a female sommelier from Napa who was a winemaker who was opening up a new restaurant. And I worked very closely with her to find the perfect wines to pair with all of our menus and our receptions. We did a massive tasting, and what we wanted to find was not the most expensive wines, because these attendees have access to those and they know those. And so that wouldn't be unique and different. So I worked with her to find some very unique, up and coming wines from the Napa Valley that were produced organically, that were very limited production, some beautiful wines from Italy that had a beautiful story behind them. And so it became not only, just the drinking of the wine, but it was an experience with a story behind it that she could tell as the attendees were eating and drinking. And then to enhance the experience, she actually walked around to all the different tables, asking people if they had any questions or if they wanted more wine, that she would pour them personally. And so I think it was just so well received. People really liked that they were learning something new, and it wasn't just the same, Opus One wine that these attendees are used to getting. Another time this is kind of a fun thing that people could play around with now virtually. But I actually wanted to demonstrate a Google Hangout. It was a new product at the time. Everyone's now pretty much aware of what a Google Hangout is. But there was a time when it was new, and I wanted to demonstrate the functionality, but do it in a fun way. And so I hired a sommelier, a female, and she was based in New York, and my attendees were in Mountain View, California. And I had her select wines that we poured in person for the attendees while she walked them through the tasting on the Hangout. And for all those speakers out there, what made it really compelling was she was picking on people in the room and asking them what they thought about the wine. So she would say hey, you in the orange shirt, what do you think about this white? And I think people were so shocked that it was a two-way exchange, because, when you first are seeing someone talking at you on a screen, you get into that mode of being a passive audience member, but to see the functionality that this could be a two-way exchange, that you could talk to someone across the nation, it really brought that product to life, and was also just a really fun way to drink wine.
Yeah.
So there's a couple examples.
Yeah, you're a pioneer in this space. Now we're all doing everything on Zoom and Google Hangouts, and all sorts of events have been turned virtual. So that's a great segue to talk about kind of what you're seeing now in digital events. I know with SoftBank, you were facilitating peer-to-peer roundtable discussions virtually and getting those set up to engage your audience there. But what are some other new content or innovations that you think make digital meetings more engaging?
Well, I think you have to think about it on a spectrum. So there's, you can have a very engaging digital meeting on a $0 budget, and you could have one on a, several $100,000 budget. And so I want to encourage people to be creative and use your constraints, to build the best experience. So to give a couple examples, I think many of you probably heard about or saw Apple's WWDC conference or the Snap Partner Summit. And, these were very well produced using sound stages. The speakers were very choreographed, and, they had obviously rehearsed. They were dressed up as if they were at a conference, speaking very professionally with, they were using AR behind the scenes, especially with Snap. I thought what was so engaging about the Partner Summit it was a show. You know, you weren't just watching one screen that was static through the whole event. You didn't want to tune out because every minute or less than every minute, the experience was changing. So it was, it was customers that were popping into different windows. It was, speakers that were changing into avatars as they talked about that product. It was just very, very dynamic and visually so engaging. I mean, the stage, they had the backdrop changing colors and, just everything wanted to make you tune into it. Now, I also recently attended a great summit last week produced by The Information, and they used a platform called Hopin. And I would strongly encourage people to check it out. It was really well done, not super expensive, not overly fancy to use. But what was very interesting about it was they had so many different features that made it an engaging experience. So you had your keynote, fine, that was a keynote, different options for how to format it, great. But there were some other really cool features that I thought really stole the show. There was a networking feature where you could click on the networking icon and then basically it counted down and you were randomly paired with another attendee for 3 minutes. It was kind of like networking roulette. But what I thought was really cool about it was it simulated in a way the way that you would randomly bump into people at a conference and randomly socialize with someone you might not otherwise socialize with. And it was very addictive. Everyone I talked to loved that feature. I think I must have met 9 people that way. And it was great. Everybody I met wanted to connect afterwards. You were given the option to connect or not. So that was very cool. And they also had a feature to create your own breakout. And so I love this crowdsourcing of content. And so the attendees could create their own breakout with the other attendees in the space, create it, other attendees could join it. So I thought there was a really good balance of pre-programmed content and speakers, open networking time, which I forgot to mention, they programmed in 15 minutes networking time between each content segment, which was not too lengthy either. And then this, unconference style crowdsourced content. So I thought that was very interesting and well done.
I love that. 2 huge improvements on kind of what we've experienced even in Zoom. You have breakout rooms, but you have to assign people or you have to kind of manually do that. The host has to do that themselves. And it's been hard to solve for that, random selection of bumping into people. It's hard to get that hallway conversation in a virtual event. That's the thing that we've noticed in our events. Like, how do we still create kind of the magic that comes from that? And I love the idea of a breakout room that people can pick themselves. So often, at events, people form a group to go to dinner or, decide to do their own thing based on who they meet and who they really want to spend more time with. So I love the idea of being able to host your own breakout room. That's amazing.
Yeah. It was really well done.
That's cool. We'll have to check out that technology. You talk a lot about, not a lot, but you talk about some really cool technologies in your book too, about, things that you've seen at events that are making them more interactive and leaning into the tech that can provide a lot more customization and personalization for events. Talk to us a little bit about some of those new technologies that you've seen in the last couple of years and what you think that can do for events in the future.
Mm-hmm. I think just taking a step back, what's most important, as you try to integrate technology in your event is do it where it makes sense. Don't force it. I worked at Google for so long and we were a tech company. And so demos and integrating tech was always a big part of the experience. But where we succeeded versus where we didn't succeed was when it felt natural, where it helped the attendees out, where it wasn't actually adding more complexity that wasn't helpful. So, if you're going to add tech, make sure that it's beneficial to your attendees and that it doesn't become a nuisance or an obstacle. So I think what struck me this year with the whole COVID situation is, we were in a similar situation back in 2008, when we were in the global recession and events were being canceled. It was a little bit different, but similar in certain ways. Now, back then, there just was not the number of virtual platforms and technology that we have today. I think someone quoted me that there's 600 virtual platforms now available. And just the sheer number of what's available and, what we have access to is mind blowing. It's almost a hindrance because it's hard to sort through everything that's out there and pick through what's the best solution for your needs. But it is super amazing that, even without being able to convene in person, we're able to go on, we're able to do business, we're coming up with creative ideas. So I think that is definitely game changing. And it's, as people are being forced into using this by necessity, they're going to become adopters. This is going to become a part of everybody's event strategy is, how to engage between these big, expensive in-person events. So I think that, this is going to be a huge game changer moving out of the COVID situation. There's other really cool technologies. Obviously, VR is a huge one. VR is tricky because I think you have to use it where it makes sense in order for it to be engaging. I recently had an agency send me their proposal for a conference in VR. And it was so cool because it allowed me to actually envision their idea for the creative, in 360 virtual reality. And you just don't get that when you're seeing a proposal in a slide deck. So that was very, very cool. There's also some cool software out there. Like I know Skipster has this really great facial recognition software. So one of those issues with personalizing your event is being able to welcome people by name as they enter your event. And so it integrates, we did this in an event a few months ago where you actually, the software helps you identify those guests through your registration portal as they enter your event. So you can welcome them by name. And just small things like that, they don't cost a lot, but people remember that and it makes it a huge difference. So those are a couple things that I think are cool. I could go on and on, but there's a lot of great technologies out there. It's all about how you use it though.
Yeah, you don't want to creep people out, as well. But you make them feel like a VIP when they're recognized. Everyone feels like special. I loved how you talked about the personalization and using QR codes or gathering that data in advance for attendees so that you can really, try to match them with the different constituents that you think they're going to want to possibly connect with, and all just different ways. And we can do these things now virtually as well. Like you said, I think everyone now knows digital events are not going anywhere. We might, see, a resurgence of live events, and digital events might quiet down for a little bit, but I think we all know that this option is not going to go away. And we're going to have to figure out how to hybridize the events, because there's going to be a lot of events that people just can't attend in person, but still want to experience or be a part of. So I think the challenge for event planners in the future is how to really make that hybridization more seamless, so the experience is not diminished because you can't be there in person, and that they're not missing out on some of the cool technical aspects by being there in person. So that's really awesome to think about, just some of the things that are out there already, creating some of these solutions and how people can start to integrate those into even their digital events. But you did mention speakers. We talked about speakers being kind of one of the big draws for high-level attendees and all attendees at events. And, our audience is made up of speakers who are out there as well. So I want to hear a little bit more about you and how you went about selecting or recommending speakers for your events for the stakeholders, and what you guys really looked for when it came to speakers for high-level events. And then talk, to us a little bit about how that changes in a digital format.
Sure. So, I think the first thing that you want to do is take the time to really learn about your audience and who your audience is. Because once you understand what they want, what's important to them, then you can figure out what kind of speakers are going to be interesting to them. So, so that's kind of where I always start. And then I map out what subject matter is interesting to them. And I do that by surveying them, by looking at what are the market trends right now for attendees of that persona, by by asking them directly via surveys what they want to hear about, especially after having a virtual event. What do you want to hear about next? What did you like about this one? What do you want to talk about next time? So, once we've got some data, then I start going through my personal Rolodex, my database, looking for recommendations from other experts in the area. And what I find is that the best speakers for your event are speakers that have an authentic connection. You can definitely use speaker bureaus, and it definitely makes sense. But speakers always do best if they understand your brand and appreciate your brand, what you're trying to do. They can speak, I think, a lot more fluently to your attendees. So making sure that even though there might be a good speaker, that they're also a good fit for your brand, that they like your brand. If you if you want to hire a speaker that has been bashing your brand online, that's obviously a terrible fit. So you have to do your research there. It goes without saying, videos are key right now. So as speakers, make sure that you're looking at what's online about you, and make sure that your top rating video is aces, because what happens is as soon as you recommend a speaker, everybody watches the first video that they Google. And so you want to make sure that that video is a good representation of your skills. Is that helpful at all?
Yeah.
Did I answer
absolutely.
the full question, or I'm trying to remember the full question?
It's okay. Let me unpack a little bit more. So
Okay.
That's speaker selection. That's awesome. We've heard from others, and that's how important it is to understand the audience and to customize to that audience and to make sure you're really speaking to them and you're not just giving a canned keynote. So talk to us a little bit about what you've seen on site that really worked well, or you don't have to name names, but when a speaker has bombed, why do you feel that wasn't successful? Where was the disconnect?
I think not being able to to go with the flow and to read the audience. The best speakers are the ones that take the time to ask questions of the audience, either in advance or during or afterwards. And, because they could be going in one direction and the audience wants to go the other direction. So you have to be flexible as a speaker and as authentic as you can be. So if you've got your one speech written and you're not willing to veer from that, you're probably not going to be as successful or resonate as much. You might, but it's kind of a coin toss. Mm-hmm. So, and then I think also being succinct and having a clear point of view and a clear takeaway for your audience. So this is something I struggle with myself, is verbosity. So being able to take your presentation and cut it in half and being comfortable with that, and allowing time for those pivots, for those Q&As. And a good exercise for speakers is to just extract the one thing that you want people to take away from your presentation. Similarly, I do that with event experience overall. I actually say three things. I say focus on the three things that you want people to remember from your event, and then deprioritize everything else, because people have a limited capacity for what they remember. And so, you really want to streamline what it is that they're going to remember from your session, from your event. And then don't sweat everything so much. It actually takes a lot of pressure off to be able to focus on just fewer things.
Yeah, that's great advice. I think a lot of speakers struggle with cutting their talks down. They often say it's harder to do a 15-minute talk than a 30 or 60-minute talk. But I think the practice of doing that, they hone people's TED Talks and they just continue honing and honing and honing, is so that main idea really gets across. And I love how events, you can think about three things because you've got a little bit more time, but you really still have to hone and narrow down to really what you want your audience to walk away feeling and thinking and remembering. I love that.
Yeah.
Now I do want you to name names though, because you've been to a lot of events, and even if it's not as a planner, as an attendee, tell us about any speaker or speakers that had an impact on you personally or professionally. Who stands out to you as someone that really made an impression?
So Angela Arendts, she's actually perfect for this month. She's a phenomenal business leader, and she was former head of brand for Burberry, and Apple. And I think what I love about her so much is she's not only incredible as a businesswoman, but she is an incredible leader. And she's also extremely authentic. And it really comes across when she speaks. She's humble, she's authentic, she's able to pivot and talk about many different subjects. So I just think she's a phenomenal human being and just a really great speaker. And I love that she's female. An executive at Google, Philip Schindler, was our head of business. And I'll never forget, again, this comes down to, being authentic and speaking about your personal experiences. But he was running, our global business organization, speaking at our conference for 15,000 people. And, he was talking about strategy and everything. And what I loved about him is he admitted when one of our competitors was doing a better job than we were. And I was shocked. Like, he actually said that. It wasn't the bull, we're doing everything better. Da, 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 da. It was, this is why I think they're doing it better. Check it out. And then the other thing that he said that I loved was, he was a father of a couple of young children. And he admitted that there were times when his work-life balance got out of control. And he reminded and encouraged everyone to remember the phrase, stress plus rest equals growth. So you have to make sure that you build in these times of rest following these times of pushing hard. And that's, I've always remembered that for some reason, is that this massively successful, important executive was willing to be humble and offer some personal advice. It just was something I always remembered.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I've been telling people for the last few years that I feel like there's a shift in speakers from energy being the most important thing. And of course, energy is still important. Content is important, but authenticity is really what wins audiences over. I've seen presenters, speakers who aren't the strongest. They might stumble over a few things here and there. Their stage presence might be able to be tweaked and improved, but because they're authentic, people just love them. The audience really just raves about them. You don't have to be this perfectly polished speaker, hitting every slide, everything right on the mark. But if you do have to be authentic for people to really connect. So I love that. Yes. I love that story. It's a good one for everyone to keep in mind. Well, we're getting towards the end of our conversation here, and I wanted to bring it back to what I would probably sum up your book to be about is, how to make things personal. The art of event planning, from what I've learned from you, is how to really bring it back to making every event that you touch a personal experience for the people who are a part of it. And I want you to share a little bit with our audience about what you think that anyone can do to make any event that they're planning, whether it's a dinner party or their wedding or whatever, a success. And I also want you to tell us about the power of s'mores.
Yes. Well, even for social events, it's important to know your goals. And like I said, just refine those goals. Guests are only going to remember a few things. So make those few things good instead of being overwhelmed and scattered and doing a lot of things not great. And people, if you're hosting a dinner party or a wedding, people probably want to go there and spend time with you. And I think one of the biggest errors that people make when they're hosting is they are so stressed. They're running around. They're trying to cook the dinner. They're doing a million things and they're not engaging with their guests. And then the whole thing's done. And it's like, they didn't have time with anyone. And that's the main reason people wanted to be there. So, when you're planning a dinner party, it's as simple as making a menu that you can strategically prepare mainly in advance so that you're not spending the whole night in the kitchen. And you're actually able to be a gracious host, to engage, to lead the conversation. Read your room. So there's going to be guests that are at your event that aren't as comfortable speaking as others. And a good host finds ways to really make sure that everybody feels included. And one trick I used to use that's anyone can do, it's super fun, is, come up with conversation starters. And what I like to do is write them and place them under the salad plate. And so then when the first course is cleared, you go around the table and people find them. And then it gives everybody an opportunity to lead the conversation at some point. Plus, you learn a lot about other people. Coming up with a couple ways to really personalize the event and add in surprise and delight. They don't have to be costly at all, but if they are important and authentic to you or to the attendees, they're going to be a smash success. So, like, just to give an example for my wedding, my dad, we gave him a saber, a wine saber. For those of you who don't know what it is, it's a giant sword. And they use it to slice the top off of champagne bottles. And so we had, to welcome guests into the reception portion of the event, the wedding, I should say, we had my dad saber the top off of the champagne bottle over the edge of this beautiful venue in Napa. And it was this big wow moment. It was wonderful to, make a transition to a different part of the event. And it was unique to us because we love wine. And so we wanted wine a part of our event at these key moments. So those are just a couple of small ideas that you could do on any budget.
I love that. And what I was referencing is that you used s'mores at an executive retreat, and people who had never even experienced that from around the world, that became one of their favorite things. Again, not an expensive thing to add. It's summer. We all might, be having s'mores, but just keep in mind that home style touches and things that are personal, maybe to you or to people, can really add a nice feeling. And
nostalgia. I was just at Skywalker Ranch yesterday talking to them about how they personalize the mini bar in every room for every guest. They find out what kind of milk they want, what kind of snacks they want, what kind of drinks they want. And we were also talking about creating very customized foods and things like ice cream, even like having a snack that's all different kinds of ice cream pops that are retro, or doing something like s'mores. If you can create that nostalgic memory in people where they were in this happy place where they could let down their guard, it's amazing what kind of barriers can be broken just by something as nostalgic as food, as s'mores, as you said.
Absolutely. Gianna, we're going to close out now. Tell our audience how they can get in touch with you. What's the best way to reach you?
Easiest way to reach me is via my website, giannaguadini.com. You can find all kinds of resources there, my contact info. And I'm also on Twitter, LinkedIn, pretty easy name to find. So giannaguadini.com. Love to hear from you.
You can find that in the show notes, and definitely check out her book, The Art of Event Planning, Pro Tips from an Industry Insider, wherever you can get books that you can also order through her website.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining Inside the Greenroom with PV3. I'm your co-host, Blair Bryant-Nichols, and today we spoke with Gianna Guadini, and she had some amazing tips about how to make your events more personal. So keep in mind that as a speaker, you want to be able to go with the flow, read the audience, and ask, just be able to make adjustments as you go. Really hone your talk so that you've got one big takeaway that you really want the audience to get from your message. Try to make it succinct and just be authentic and flexible. Like I said, in this interview, I've always, thought that energy was the most important part of speaking. But in the last few years, I've really seen this shift that it's all about authenticity. You still need to have good energy. You still need to have great content, but you really want to be authentic and connect with the audience and understand the audience. That's something we're going to keep reminding you, customizing and tailoring to the audience. As an event planner, you want to have the same sort of ideas in mind around what your goals are for the event. What are the 3 things that you want people to walk away feeling, remembering, and talking about, so that the next time you're doing this event, especially if it's the first time, you want to really get off on the right foot and build that buzz around it, especially if you're trying to attract high-level attendees. Make it simple though. Make it easy for people to participate. Bring everyone in. Try to include everyone. So yeah, I hope that you enjoyed today's interview. You can check us out at InsideTheGreenRoomPodcast.com. Please be sure to subscribe. And if you are a meeting planner, please check out our Facebook group, Your Events Matter. Just search that on Facebook and join us there, and you can be part of our next live conversation.
Hey, thanks for listening to Inside the Green Room with PV3. If you liked our show, make sure you never miss an episode. Subscribe and leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts. To see the full show notes and more resources, go to InsideTheGreenRoomPodcast.com. Make sure to join us next week for more cutting-edge, actionable tips from the meeting planners who control the most prestigious stages and the speakers who use those stages to increase their income and their impact.